we will give Lisa and her wonderful panel a chance to actually get started.
Yeah. Good morning. I'm really excited to be here. It really feels like the good old days, Neera and Neelam. So when the previous panel asked us to raise our hands about do we work in India, do we give in India, and are we foundations, I didn't know where to raise my hand. We have worked in India, and I feel like we're still working in India, even though that work is today a little bit more indirect. So today I'm going to share a little bit about myself, about our foundation, and I have the joy and honor of sharing the voices on this panel here, all of whom I know in one way, shape, or form through the work that our foundation has done with the DASRA folks. One thing I learned today, by the way, I'm Lisa Kleisner. I'm the president of the KL Felicitas Foundation. Our wealth came out of Silicon Valley. We had a long-term interest in India that preceded Silicon Valley. I used to work in India when I was a young architect. And then when we had made a decision to try to figure out how to get more leveraged impact out of our small, we consider it small relative to other foundations, we started to look more globally. And India came into our view very strongly for a number of things because there's so many natural resources in the people, in the culture, in the size of the country, politically, economically. So we felt that there was a lot of good starting places, and so we went to explore how we could have an impact, a meaningful impact in India, and that is going to be a little bit of a central piece of the conversation that we're going to have today. One thing I learned today is that you and I are just as old. I always thought you were younger, Neera. But actually, yeah, so DASRA is 20 years old. Our foundation is also 20 years old. Yeah. And yeah, I'm 65. And the point there is that it takes time. What we're talking about is patience, patient capital. We've done 2 impact reports with our foundation, and I just got an email from one of our investees in India, 2006. She published her first impact report. It's a for-profit, it's a business, and it was an amazing impact report. And she was so excited to share it with us. But it took us 13 years to get to that point. And so we have to, if we really want to have the deep, systemic, long-term, transformative impact, we have to be willing to stay the course and to repeat some themes from the last few sessions. We need to do multi-year granting, multi-year investments even, right? Debt, low-interest debt, equity investments where appropriate. We need to be at the table with flexible capital that meets the needs of the impact enterprise sitting in front of us. So I have a joke that I'm going to tell you that's going to sort of set the stage. So Civil War, the general's in the tent, and he sends the scout out. And he says, tell me, where's the front line? Where's the enemy? He's gone for like 2 hours. Everybody's getting really nervous. And then he finally comes back, and General's like, okay, so where's the front line? How many people are out there? And he goes, oh, I have terrible news. We're surrounded. And the general says, that's really not terrible news because no matter where we shoot, we'll have impact. Now, that's kind of what some investment people do here in Silicon Valley. It's called the spray and pray philosophy. I think there's some people who do that in philanthropy. When my husband and I started philanthropy, we thought we understood what we needed to do, but like Safira explained, we had to get some capacity building to figure it out. What we ultimately found out in the arc of 20 years is it's not spray and pray. Actually, it's all about being a partner with the impact you want to have and the people who are in that organization who are going to be pushing that mission along. And your role is Yoda, right? We're all Yodas, us folks who have the capital who can help and who have the business acumen that can help mentor them to figure out what the capacity and the systems are that they need to, that they're pushing against, and how most effectively to have the impact that they really deserve. So, so with that in mind, I'm also going to just lastly talk about our impact report that I nuanced. So we've done 2. took us the first time, I think, 17 years, and the last one was 19 years to do. Guess what had the most impact in our portfolio? Hands down. The capacity building. The money we put into capacity building organizations in India, in Central and Eastern Europe, and in my home state of Hawaii, when we looked at the amount of capital, the diversity in capital that these organizations were able to raise, that they attributed to the capacity building that these programs offered, stood head and shoulders above any other impact in our report. And so I would underscore that when we think about how we want to invest our capital, we need to think more broadly about how and treat our organizations in a way that our capital is looking at all the aspects of their business, and we're investing in it in an integral way. We're not saying, I'm only going to support the program here, you figure out how to get your ops money elsewhere. We have to see the organization as a whole and invest in it as a whole. So with that, I have the honor, and I'm going to start with Neelam, who's on my left. And you're on the back here. So Neelam and I, we've known each other for 14 years. And I've watched her move from the way she had her organization and her business put together and how she's iterated over the years. And there's been quite a few pivots and really good ones. And so my question for you, first one is, how have the funders you've worked with evolved in the terms of their understanding what you truly need to scale the different enterprises that you have honchoed in the last 14 years?
Yeah. So before I get into that, I'll just give a brief background about what I do. So we focus on the area of livelihoods, what the Deshpande Foundation is working on. We work on women's economic empowerment, right? Because we found that if you put money in the hands of women, you will see improved health, nutrition, the works, right? And so, to come back to Lisa's question, I started with impact investment. So I ran a for-profit social enterprise. So technically, and we received the Schwab World Economic Forum Award for Social Entrepreneur of the Year 2011 because we were building an ecosystem, because we were looking at different forms of capital to address different ways of solving the problem. So in the for-profit, thanks to the capacity building done by Social Impact, which was pre-Dasra. Social Impact morphed into Dasra. So I'm cohort 2 of Social Impact, which was pre-Dasra. My husband is cohort 4 of Dasra.
And I'm 5.
5. I have 3 people in my organization who've gone through the Dasra program. I think my son is going to join the Dasra program. So so the capacity building piece has actually brought us to where we are today. And to answer the lady's question about how are we going to change the systems of government, it's only going to be through ecosystem building. And systems change will happen only when we get to the government. So coming back to your capital question, we have a non-profit that raises philanthropic capital. A certain piece of the activity can only be addressed through returnable capital, which is debt, the entire spectrum, because we build women's collectives. So in the first 3 years of the collective, it's a co-op. The women will earn wages and they will get dividends. It's a wealth creation piece. Lisa taught me. She says you need to raise grant equity. I learned this from her, the word. Because who is going to put equity into a cooperative where dividends will flow only to the women? It will not go back to the investor. So we raise philanthropic grant for the first 3 years of the collective. Then the collective is going to become self-sustainable and profitable. And that's when you're going to have to raise impact investment into it, which is going to give a return. And then all of these people need debt. They need working capital money. There is literally no debt for collectives in India. The Indian banking system is not mandated to do it. But as we do this, we speak to the government. We have to show working models to the government, and the government will transfer it into their programs, and that's when you will get systems change. Did I answer your question?
You sure did.
That's all I need.
So that was a great example of how we call it appropriate returns. So sometimes an appropriate return for us is 0 on the financial side and some metric on the impact side. And other times it might be sub-market rate on the financial side and some measure of impact on the impact side. And sometimes it'll be all the way on the other end of the spectrum where it will be what we call almost a shallow impact, but indeed an impact maybe environmental or otherwise. And this would be probably in the public markets. And there the impact is light, but maybe the financial return is more market rate. So what I'm trying to describe there is a movement across a spectrum where the expectations are key to the impact that we want to have. So, and I think that's exactly what you've just described, that grant equity acts like an equity anchor to allow you to grow the company, at which point you get to a point where you can then service debt, or you create assets within the organization that it can then be self-sustaining. So that's a really great example. Those concepts, by the way, were early days in DASRA, early days in the accelerator that we started in India, that then became DASRA's accelerator eventually. And then, but those concepts were early days, and she was one of the pioneers in willingness to try that out and experiment with it. And today, it's interesting that she's gone from a for-profit enterprise and now moved into a nonprofit, because without subsidy, certain parts of the gaps in the marketplace will not be solved for. And after this long arc of being on the for-profit side, she realized that if she could have philanthropic capital to support it, she could build the necessary tools and instruments to reach a very broad audience with what she learned in the for-profit enterprise. So, and thank you for reminding me that even though I know you for 14 years, maybe the audience doesn't know you and what you're up to. And so I'm going to go to you, Raj, next, and I will ask you to tell us a little bit about Lend a Hand India. And I have a question for you, because you're operating in 23 states in India, so you're scaled. That's a lot to manage, right? Is the number right, 23?
24 now.
Okay,
we just signed
24.
up with one more.
And so you have a lot of partnerships with government,
Yes.
and I'm sure philanthropy as well. How are you able to maintain a consistent focus on institutional capacity building while you continue to scale the program?
So first of all, thank you. This is great to be a token male member on the panel here. Very honored. So Lend a Hand India, quickly, the focus of the organization is to mainstream vocational education in the academic curriculum that we have. So basically, we introduce vocational education as part of the secondary and higher secondary school curriculum, which is 9th to 12th grade and 14 to 18 years old. And vocational is introduced as one core subject, a 100-mark subject with a board exam and industry certification. That's the core of the Lend a Hand India's work. We started in 2006-07 with 2 schools and $500. And now we are currently in about 10,000 plus schools with 1 million kids across 25 states now. So that was about Lend a Hand India. And coming to your question about focus on capacity building, I think much of it is also lies in the ability to say no, in that. And it recently happened to us that I was working on a grant for almost 1.5 years. It was a $1.4 million grant, so really very, dear to and very critical for us. But we declined it last week, because it didn't provide enough to develop my own staff and monitoring, tracking, and other things too. And the entire focus was on just unit cost, cost per beneficiary, something like that. So with a very heavy heart, we had to decline, because we all know how hard it is to raise funds, and a $1.4 million is no chump change. So I think that is one thing, that being able to very have that clarity that this is what we will do and this is what we will not do, has also helped us to scale. In that. Secondly, I think the clarity of thought. And I almost, there is a Hindi song, right? 100 साल पहले मुझे तुमसे प्यार था, आज भी है, कल भी रहेगा, you know. So I think that is very true about the cause that you're working for, you know. So somebody asked us, hey Raj, are you guys still doing vocational education in the school? We said, I'm sorry to disappoint you. After 12 years, we are doing only that, you know, nothing else. As such. So I think that is second, that being able to focus on keep doing whatever you do and, you know, sort of go deeper into that. Third has been no logos and egos, you know, because I think many times as we grow and as we scale, it becomes much more about us, the founders, and, you know, much more about how full become of ourselves. As compared to, you know, being able to whom are we sort of, you know, sort of working for, right? So that has been a third thing that we try to ingrain in the people who are sort of, you know, working for us. Then we look at that, you know, how do we really provide for now? As you mentioned, we are across 24 states now. So our people are sitting right from Nagaland to Leh Ladakh to, you know, Chennai to Bhuj to Bhubaneswar. Now there can be 24 Lend-A-Hand Indias within Lend-A-Hand India, you know, if I just let it go like that. So we definitely provide for that every quarter, all of us will come together. It literally costs us close to over $20,000 per meet, but it is most essential to do that, right? Otherwise, we as an organization will not survive, and we have to raise funds for that and other things too, but doing that has also helped us to sort of, you know, look at it as such. And I think being able to tell the donor, you know, that is what is needed. It's almost like if you're booking an airline ticket and you will say that I'm going to book a, you know, air ticket where the airline is, you know, spending the least on the maintenance cost, you know, that's the flight I'm going to take. It is akin to that, right? That I'm going to give it to somebody who is spending least on the, you know, the other part of actually being able to run the organization in that. And lastly, I would say that, and Lisa, so there have been, I was part of the same, you know, journey which Lisa and her foundation supported. So I think organizations like Dasra have been great. I mean, when I was quitting my job at Citibank, and I did 1-year program, and from New York to Bombay, you know, every quarter, it helped me to decide to quit my job, you know. And I think, and there are quite a few organizations from my cohort like Make a Difference, you know, then Mila, Avanti Fellows, Lend-A-Hand. We have scaled, you know, quite well, and that is tribute to, you know, the program which Social Impact, DSS Dasra Social Impact ran. So I think, you know, that's another sort of way to look at it, that consistent focus on it and being able to say no and being able to sort of, you know, keep it at the top of the mind has been what have been able to do, and it has actually helped us to scale more. You know, many times one would think that by saying no, but it has created a reputation that this is what the organization stands for and this is what they will, you know, like to do. Right? So.
The power of no to get to the right yes. Thank you for sharing that. You reminded me of a story of one of our other, this is a group in Hawaii that went through our accelerator. And by the way, so we did our first accelerator experience in India, my husband and I, with many people in this room. We had no idea initially what we were doing. We knew intentionally what we wanted, and so we were building and designing at the same time. We learned so much from the Indians during the time that we did that work, and that work has informed the accelerator that we built in Central and Eastern Europe, and also the accelerator that we're active in that one, and also the one in Hawaii that we've been building for about 8 years. And so I do think a big legacy of that program is that it's now serving other geographies, and the program that we do in Central Eastern Europe and the one that we do in Hawaii is being copied elsewhere. The one in Hawaii being copied into the Pacific Basin, and the one in Central Eastern Europe has been copied in Europe and deeper into Eastern Europe. So thank you, you guys that were the pioneers. And unbeknownst to you, you had even more impact than just with your enterprises or only with your skill building, right? So thank you for that. Also, you have challenges. I want you to share some of the challenges that you faced. You shared the no thing, but I want you to share a little bit about the scaling of the livelihood program for the in-school adolescents, because here in the U.S., if we look at philanthropic capital, let's use that screen over there as an example. Philanthropic capital would be a corner of that screen that might be about maybe 6 inches long and 6 inches deep in that direction. That's the whole of philanthropic capital. Next to that would be one that would be maybe 4 times that size. Oh, is that the time? No. That would be government capital, and the rest of it is private capital. So if philanthropy isn't willing to take a lot of risk and government isn't willing to partner with philanthropy to tackle the task of trying to invite and entice private capital to join on the impact picture, we will never solve for the SDGs. And that was the message that came from the first speaker today, that India is really struggling to figure out how to get the capital. So the private capital sector in India has to step up. And so that's kind of where I'm going with my question to you. How active is the private sector in the work that you're doing on the philanthropic side or the investment side, whichever works?
Sure. So I think all of us here know that India had a CSR law, and that has definitely helped to bring more private sector capital into the market. And our scaling up strategy has been that rather than increasing our own footprint by directly working on the ground, which we do in about 150 schools as a lab or act as a model centers for us, it is by embedding ourselves within the government. So we deploy our people within the Department of Education, and through them we write the state policy and get large scale funding, as well as act as a project management unit. Now, how do you raise funds for this, right? It was initially when I started doing fundraising for this model, where you are putting people into the government, and then we were asked that government has thousands of millions of dollars, why should I pay for your person in that? And for a while I didn't have answer to that, but then I dug back into my Citibank finance background. I said, there's you invest into mutual fund, right? And you invest in mutual fund, you pay 2% to the mutual fund manager, so that you will make better returns and the investment is better. The same way, it's your taxpayers' money. What government is spending is the taxpayers' money, your own money, and you need to pay 2% to me so that the taxpayer money is being spent wisely, right? Or we used to say, we run schools as well, that you give me money for 20 schools or you give me money for 20 people. 20 schools can definitely benefit about 2,000 students who are part of the program. But if you give me 20 people, then my home state of Maharashtra itself has 20,000 high schools. So I'll be able to impact what is happening in the 20,000 high schools. So I think we needed to come up with that, multiple ways to being able to position what we are doing, and eventually then it became sort of, easier to do that. So it's almost like a ideal public-private partnership where the NGO is bringing the technical or domain expertise, the private sector is bringing the financial capital or risk capital, you can say, and the government is putting in its policy power and a very large-scale funding to do that, and the private capital will act as a catalyst, to sort of generate a very large scaled up model through that. And that is how, with just $2.2 million and 240 people, we have been able to reach 10,000 schools, right? So that's the leverage ROI you can say.
Now that's an ROI.
Yes.
That's a great story. Thank you, Priya. Also, I would like to ask you to share a little bit about your enterprise, and then the question that I have for you is, it's a little bit in line with what we have heard from the other two speakers, and that is how your prior experience with capacity building in other organizations before your current organization has informed the work in the organization that you're leading right now.
Thank you. So I run an organization called Antarang. We're based out of Mumbai in India, and we work in 4 metros. So I would be wary of saying that we work in 3 states. We actually work in 4 cities in India, which is really sort of minuscule. So our work really begins, Sri as well as Tarun spoke a little bit to that in the morning, right? So it's been remarkable that in India, close to 100% of our kids are enrolled in school, right? But slowly that picture starts unraveling by the time kids reach high school. So less than half of our children actually graduate high school. A quarter of them go on to any form of higher education or even, higher vocational education, for example, and less than 6% of them actually get into mainstream industry. So that funnel is extremely narrow. So what my organization really does is to ensure that children transition safely from school to productive work. Our vision is to, to make sure that every adolescent and young adult in India is productively, passionately, and positively engage in a career of his or her choice. So basically democratizing the concept of careers and career growth, and not just sort of economic empowerment, but social as well as economic mobility, right? You need to be earning more money as you grow. You need to be socially sort of growing up, getting a bigger house, making sure that there's food on the table, making sure that your children go to school, your family gets healthcare when required, and all of that is possible when this young adult actually starts working. And and that's something that a lot of the other panelists also spoke to. So our work actually begins right from the high school stage, where we provide career guidance, make sure that kids know what they can do, because as a country we've internalized that education is good, but how much of that education is good and what that education can convert to is still a little bit of a black box. So we begin with actually career guidance and career counseling at the high school stage. We work across all the government schools in Mumbai, Pune, Udaipur and Varanasi right now. And then go on to providing employability skills. So again, to answer your second question, and maybe I'll come to that through the model that we have. Because I was part of the Dasra cohort right at the very beginning when I was leading another organization that was at the cusp of stage, one of the key things that, that I brought into Antarang when we started is the importance of working through existing systems and working with the government through analogies that they can relate to. Right, so the health system has an Anganwadi for every low-income community, right? So, and that Anganwadi makes sure that pregnant mothers, babies, as well as adolescent girls are healthy and and get good nutrition. So the same concept we've been presenting to the government, and that's what we envision, is to ensure that there's an employability hub within every low-income community that becomes this aggregator of everything that a young adult needs to make sure that he or she actually transitions into productive workforce, right? Whether it's entrepreneurship or into jobs. So actually working on capacity building, right early on, one of the key things that we did was to ensure that there is a strong team. Our finance and accounting systems were pretty much in place right at the beginning, sort of set up all of those systems that are required. Monitoring systems were in place because you need evidence, you need to create evidence if you need to be able to, inform any kind of scaling or to be, to prove a point, and which is what Raj also spoke about and Neelam in answer to your question, to be able to make sure that there is evidence to scale, make sure that we invested in people, right? And truly the maintenance and making sure that the aircraft is strong and can fly you from A to B, which is actually really difficult at the early stages because you're so focused on getting the product right and making sure that the product is impactful that a lot of the other things sometimes takes, sort of second stage. But I guess being part of organizations where you know that the health of the organization is critical really helped me make sure that those systems and processes were put in place. And yeah.
So here in Silicon Valley, we invest in teams, right? And they do a lot of pivots. But somehow in philanthropy, we got on the wrong road. We said, we're going to invest in the pivots, not in the team. And so I think that was the big realization my husband and I had early on when we actually were directed by our philanthropic advisor initially to do programmatic funding and be very strict on the operational side. And then we were like, why? Why are we doing that? And it was in that moment that we dropped that approach, and that's when and so that was like 2000 and 2004 or 5 was when we started to look at changing our whole model, and that has for us been really at the core of the impact that we've been able to achieve over the last 20 years. So we've got about 5 minutes, and so I wanted to open it up for questions, and if there's two questions, maybe we have time to take that if anyone is interested. Yes, sir.
Question from Priya. What employability skills do you find are the most effective or most rewarding in the marketplace?
Sure. So, we are at this strange position in India and across the world where we really don't know what the future of jobs is going to be. A lot has been written, a lot has been spoken about that. we work with the urban poor. We're pretty focused on working with the urban poor. And in the urban situation in India, it's largely the service industry. There's very little manufacturing that's actually happening, and there's a lot of entrepreneurship that's happening today. So we focus on all of those core skills that today is known as by many names, 21st century learning skills, what you may have it. But basically to be able to communicate effectively, think logically, think critically, problem solve effectively, to be able to be completely digitally literate and close that digital divide, which very often becomes, a game changer when you're looking for any form of employment. Basic commercial literacy, can I draw up a simple profit and loss statement? Do I know how to do basic, commercial transactions? So those are the skills, and the ability to work collaboratively. So those are the skills that we focus on. It's a fairly focused 150-hour curriculum that we deliver, and it's delivered at colleges currently. We've made it part of the curriculum, as well as through these, community-based employability hubs that are run in partnership.
Thank you for the question. Any other questions in the room? If not, we'll conclude early to buy time for the next panel. Oh. Okay, sorry.
I was just wondering, what is the impediment to capacity building? I know that oftentimes when somebody calls me and says, I'm looking, for some local body, they're raising money, and the question that comes to my mind even is that, where is this money going? Maybe, and then you read that 85% of the money is kind of gone in organizational ability, and only 15% goes to that. So I think that's the mental picture that an average donor has, not average individual donor has. But what you're saying is extremely important, and just like you build an organization, any organization, it starts with the people, it starts with all the things that we just talked about, that you're trying to inculcate in young youth. So then, what is there a number in that, that's the right number?
Yeah, it's a really good question.
Number to a low number, what's the picture there?
Yeah, it's actually, it's a really good question, but perhaps it's not the right question. So what we've learned over the years is that there's some aspect of capacity building in the nonprofit and the for-profit impact world that is one size roughly fits all. But that is a very short ramp. And once you get off that ramp, then it gets into bespoke services. And so the one size fits all is really, for us, we describe it as we lift the hood of the nonprofit, we take a look inside together, and we see what's in there or not in there, and then we come up with a laundry list, and then we start to pair them with specialists. Finance is a big one. I have to say the number one Achilles heel of for and not-for-profit enterprises, impact or not, is understanding finance and how to leverage finance. And so we actually have built in our engine, particularly in Hawaii and in Europe, we've got a group that's all that they do. They know how to work with these small fledgling enterprises and build things like pro formas so that they can take a look at what their business could look like in 4 to 5 years. We help them build it out to the inflection point of sustainability, and I've got 2 more minutes. So when we say capacity building, it's not one size fits all. It's about sitting down with your grantee and lifting that hood and looking and seeing where do they need help, and then using your personal resource and your personal business acumen to either help them move forward, or you bring in expertise from the outside. You will see tremendous gains by taking that approach, a more personalized approach.
Can I take 30 seconds? Sure. Because I think there's a lot of talk about, working with the government and all. And what I would say is that we need to have empathy for government. We start with a very negative this thing, that government never works. That is how I was before I started working for it, in 2011, that I always say that if you want to experience the life of a bureaucrat, become, a management committee member of your housing complex, and you will know how thankless that job is, and, any commonsensical thing like a parking or anything is going to take you 3 years to resolve. And about the time taken by the government, I would say that, if you're buying a smartphone, you will probably spend a month, talking to 10 folks and, reading consumer report and this and that and all that. And still, you will take 1 month to do that. But if a bureaucrat who is, deciding 20,000 schools, 2 million kids, and if they take 3 months, we say, oh, they are not deciding. You only decide what the time taken is needed or not.
So I'm going to ask, we get a stop, but I'm going to ask each of you to say just one thing to the audience, and that is, what would you like the audience to do differently?
There's been a lot of talk in this room about philanthropy and about the government, but there's something on the private sector. So our collaboratives are built with mainstream businesses. So we have a 7-year partnership with IKEA, which is priceless. Our collectives are getting to profit. We are impacting about 60,000 women, but there are 2,000 farmers and women in the IKEA value chain. So I think there's a lot. I just want to say that this ship is not going to move just with donors and just with governments. You need corporate businesses to get into the game, especially when you're talking about things like livelihoods. Because I've tried to build productive value chains with B2C business and Indian businesses, but you need to have the Gaps, the Zaras, all your large consumer businesses, the Unilevers, buying from these value chains. So I just wanted to bring that into the discussion.
I think, Raj, you already had your last word on empathy for the government.
Yes.
And I would say patience.
Yes. And you can give Priya her last word.
Yeah, so I guess I'd sort of echo what Neelam said, and I would say that really open up your organizations and your networks to hire more young people. Because they need that little leg in, and I feel that with all the influence that is there, that's easily possible here. Yeah. So.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.